My name is Emily Harper. I am 35 years old. You learn a lot about trust when the person who knows your smallest habits and biggest fears is the same person who quietly rewrites the story of your life while you are still standing in the room. I had spent the last decade believing that my best friend would always choose honesty with me even when it was uncomfortable. I had spent 4 years building a quiet, steady life with my boyfriend in a lakeside neighborhood outside Madison, Wisconsin, where the water stayed calm most mornings, and the biggest decisions were usually about which trail to walk on the weekend. That Tuesday evening in early October changed the shape of everything, and it did not happen with raised voices or slammed doors. It happened with a manila folder on the kitchen table and my best friend sitting beside my boyfriend, her face arranged in the exact expression of reluctant concern she had perfected over years of being the reliable one. Daniel had come home early from work that day. I noticed his car in the driveway when I pulled in after a long meeting at the office where I managed client projects for a small environmental consulting firm. Lauren's silver SUV was parked behind his. I remember pausing for a second in the garage, wondering if I had forgotten some plan the two of them had made without me. Lauren had been spending more time with Daniel lately, offering to help him sort through stress at his architecture firm or listen when he needed to vent about difficult clients. I had been grateful for it. She had always been good at noticing when people needed support. When I stepped into the kitchen, they were already sitting at the round table by the window that overlooked the water. Daniel's hands were folded on top of a thin folder. Lauren had a glass of water in front of her untouched. She looked up first. "Emily," she said, and her voice was soft in the way it got when she was about to deliver difficult news. "We need to talk about some things that have been weighing on both of us." I set my bag down slowly. The house felt smaller than it had that morning. "All right," I said. "What things?" Daniel finally looked at me. His expression was tired, the kind of tired that comes after a decision has already been made. "Lauren came to me a couple of weeks ago," he said. "She didn't want to. She kept hoping she was wrong. But she showed me some statements from the joint account we opened last year. There are transfers out that don't match anything we discussed, and the dates line up with the weekends you said you were driving up to see your family." I felt the first small shift inside my chest, the beginning of a crack I would not be able to close later. "I haven't moved any money out of that account without telling you," I said. My voice stayed even. I had learned early that raising it never helped when Daniel was already braced for conflict. Lauren reached across the table and touched the edge of the folder as if she were protecting it. "I know how this sounds," she said. "I hate that I'm the one sitting here. But I overheard part of a call you made last month when you thought I was in the other room. You were talking to your brother about needing your own money set aside just in case. You said Daniel had been difficult about the house expenses and that you didn't want to feel trapped." I turned to look at her directly. We had known each other since we were 24 through 3 apartments, 2 job changes, and the slow building of the life I now shared with Daniel. "Lauren," I said, I have never taken money that wasn't mine. If you heard something, it was probably taken out of context. I talk to my older brother Michael about work stress sometimes. That doesn't mean I'm planning to empty our account." She held my gaze without flinching. I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't sure she answered. "I care about both of you too much to watch this relationship fall apart because one person is keeping secrets." Daniel slid the folder toward me. Inside were printed bank statements with several lines highlighted in yellow. The amounts were small enough to look suspicious, but large enough to matter. $300 here, $400 there, always on days I had been out of the house. I had never seen them before. I also noticed the name of the law firm printed at the bottom of one of the pages, a firm Lauren had mentioned once or twice when Daniel was complaining about contract issues at work. "You had papers drawn up," I said quietly. Daniel nodded once. Lauren recommended someone who could help us separate things temporarily, just until we understand what's happening. It's not about punishment. It's about protecting both of us while we figure this out. I sat down in the chair across from them because standing suddenly felt like too much effort. The light coming through the window had turned the water outside a flat gray. Lauren reached over and rested her hand lightly on Daniel's forearm, a small gesture of support that I had seen her offer 100 times before when one of us was upset. This time the gesture landed differently. "I'm not going to fight you on the account," I said after a moment. "If you want the statements reviewed, we can do that together. But I need you to hear me when I say I did not move that money, and I need to know why you believed Lauren's version before you asked me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because she has no reason to lie to me about something this serious. She's been the one holding this together for weeks while I tried to decide what to do. You've been distant. You've been taking calls in the other room." Lauren noticed it before I did. My best friend nodded, her eyes full of something that looked like genuine sadness. "I tried to give you space to come to me first," she said. "When you didn't, I had to choose what was right for the people I love." I stayed at the table for another 20 minutes. I asked calm questions. I pointed out that the highlighted transfers did not match any of my usual spending patterns. I asked Lauren if she could remember the exact words she claimed to have overheard. She gave me a version that sounded close enough to real conversations I had with my older brother to make denial feel pointless in the moment. Daniel listened without interrupting her. When I finished speaking, he said the papers would be filed in the morning and that he was going to stay with a colleague for a few days while everything settled. Lauren stood up when he did. She hugged me before she left, the same quick, familiar hug she had given me after every hard conversation we had ever had. "I'm still here," she said into my shoulder. "Whenever you're ready to talk about how we move forward from this." They left together. I heard their cars start in the driveway one after the other. The house settled into the kind of quiet that only happens when you realize the version of your life you had been living is already gone. I did not cry. I made a cup of tea I did not drink and carried it to the small desk in the spare room where I sometimes worked late. My phone sat on the corner of the desk. I stared at it for a long time before I picked it up and called my older brother, Michael. He answered on the second ring the way he always did when it was me. "Emily," he said. His voice was steady, the same tone he used when one of his own projects hit an unexpected problem. "What happened?" I told him, keeping the details short and factual. I told him about the folder, the highlighted lines, the law firm name at the bottom, and the version of a phone call my best friend had chosen to share. I told him Daniel was staying elsewhere and that papers would be filed in the morning. I did not raise my voice. I did not call Lauren names. I simply described what had been said and done in my own kitchen less than an hour earlier. Michael was quiet for several seconds after I finished. "Do you want me to have someone look at the statements?" he asked finally. "Thomas can be there tomorrow if you need him." Thomas Reed was the attorney who had handled a few quiet matters for our family over the years. I had met him twice. He was careful and precise, and never made anything larger than it needed to be. "I don't know yet," I said. "I want to see if Daniel will actually look at the records with me before this turns into something bigger." Lauren has been part of our life for a long time. I keep thinking there has to be a reason she would do this that isn't just cruelty. "You don't have to decide everything tonight," Michael said. "But if the papers get filed, call me. We can respond without making it a war." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. He asked about work. I asked about his kids. When we hung up, the house felt even quieter than before. I sat at the desk and watched the last light leave the lake. My phone lit up with a text from Lauren. "I'm really sorry tonight had to happen this way," it read. I still care about you. I'm here if you want to talk through any of it. Take care of yourself. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down and turned off the lamp. The dark felt cleaner than the conversation I had just survived. If you have ever sat in your own kitchen while two people who know you best decided together that your version of events could not possibly be true, you will understand why I needed the rest of the story to be told out loud. Some choices only make sense when you can hear the silence that followed them. The next morning, the rain had already started a steady gray that blurred the line between the lake and the sky. I made coffee out of habit and carried the mug to the small desk where my laptop sat closed. The text from my best friend was still on the screen when I woke the phone. I read it once more, then deleted it without answering. Some kindnesses are easier to recognize when they arrive dressed as concern. I went to the office because staying home felt like giving the story more room than it deserved. The consulting firm where I managed client timelines was small enough that people noticed when someone was quieter than usual. I had been there 3 years. Most days I liked the predictable rhythm of deadlines and site visits. That day the rhythm felt borrowed. Sofia Ramirez stopped by my desk around mid-morning with 2 cups of tea. She worked on the permitting side and had a way of noticing small changes without making them into announcements. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, setting 1 cup down. "Everything all right at home," I thanked her for the tea and gave the shortest answer that still felt honest. "Daniel and I are sorting through some paperwork. It's taking longer than I expected." She didn't push. She just nodded and said the new client file was ready whenever I wanted to look at it. Later, when I passed her in the hallway, she added quietly, "If you need someone to sit with the paperwork and tell you what the language actually means, I know a paralegal who does that kind of reading for friends. No charge, no questions." I told her I would think about it. The offer stayed with me through the rest of the afternoon. By the time I left the building, the rain had thinned to a mist. My phone showed a new email from a law firm I did not recognize. The subject line was simple, temporary financial separation. Whitaker and Harper. The body explained that at the request of Daniel Whitaker and following concerns raised by a third party close to the household, certain joint accounts would be placed on temporary hold pending review. A meeting could be scheduled if I wished to discuss the terms. The signature belonged to an attorney whose name I had never heard. I sat in the car with the engine off and read the email twice. The language was careful and neutral. It did not accuse, it simply acted. I recognized the firm name from the folder my best friend had placed on the kitchen table the night before. When I called Daniel, the call went to voicemail. I left a short message asking if we could meet somewhere public to go over the actual bank records together before anything else was filed. I did not mention the email. I wanted to see whether he would bring it up first. He texted back 2 hours later. "Lauren thinks it's better if we let the lawyers handle the first round, so nothing gets misinterpreted. She's been helping me organize the statements. I'll let you know when there's a date." I read the message while standing at the kitchen counter. The house was exactly as I had left it, yet it already felt like a place I was visiting rather than living in. My best friend had not needed to raise her voice or slam a door. She had simply kept showing up with the next reasonable step, and Daniel had kept accepting it. That evening, I drove to a coffee shop near the water where the Wi-Fi was reliable, and the tables were far enough apart that conversations did not carry. I called my older brother Michael again. I told him about the email and the text from Daniel. I told him I still wanted to clear the record without turning the whole thing into a public argument. Michael listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said Thomas Reed could review the language in the email the next morning if I wanted a second set of eyes that had no stake in the outcome. "I'm not asking you to start anything," I said. "I just want to know what the papers actually allow before I agree to anything." "You don't have to agree to anything," Michael answered. but having someone read it who isn't trying to manage your feelings is useful. Thomas will keep it quiet." I thanked him and hung up. The call had lasted less than 10 minutes. I closed the laptop and sat for a while watching people come in from the mist-shaking rain from their coats. On the way out, I passed a small table near the back where 2 women were talking in low voices. One of them glanced up as I walked by. I recognized her as someone who had been at a few dinners with Daniel and me over the years, a friend of a friend. She looked away quickly. I kept walking. The next day, Thomas Reed met me at a small conference room in a building I had never entered before. He was in his late 50s, calm in the way people become when they have read too many versions of the same story. He read the email and the attached draft language without comment. When he finished, he set the papers down and folded his hands. The language creates a temporary freeze on joint movement of funds above a certain amount, he said. It also requests that you provide documentation for any withdrawals made in the last 90 days. There is no accusation of wrongdoing in the document itself. The request for documentation is framed as standard when one party raises concerns about account activity. Who raised the concerns, I asked. The document refers to information provided by a third party with direct knowledge of the household. It does not name the person. I nodded. I already knew the name. Thomas continued in the same measured tone. If you sign the acknowledgement, you agree to the temporary measures while the review happens. If you do not sign, the other side can still pursue the freeze through the court, which would make the matter public record. The choice is whether you want the process to stay private for now. I left the meeting with a copy of the papers and a clear sense of the narrow path in front of me. Signing felt like accepting a premise I did not believe. Not signing felt like inviting strangers into a story that was already being told without me. That afternoon, Sophia texted from the office. The permitting meeting ran long. "If you want to grab dinner somewhere quiet after work, I'm around. No pressure." I met her at a small place near the lake that stayed open late on weekdays. We talked about work for the first half hour. Then she asked gently whether the paperwork was the kind that needed more than one set of eyes. I told her the outlines without naming anyone. She listened the same way she had listened at the office without offering solutions that were not hers to give. Before we left, she said, "There's something else. One of the women who sometimes joins the larger client dinners asked me today if everything was okay with you and Daniel. She said she had heard you were going through a rough patch and that Lauren had been really supportive of him. I told her I didn't know anything about it. She seemed surprised I hadn't heard the same version. I kept my hands around the warm mug. The story was already moving beyond the kitchen table. The following morning, I received another text, this one from a different mutual acquaintance. It was short and careful. "Hey, just checking in. Heard some stuff and wanted to make sure you're all right. Lauren mentioned you might need space, but if you want to talk, I'm here." I did not answer that one either. 2 days later, Daniel agreed to meet me at the coffee shop where I had called Michael. He arrived first and chose a table near the window. Lauren was not with him, but her influence was. He had printed copies of the highlighted statements and a timeline someone had created showing the dates of the withdrawals next to my known schedule. "I'm not accusing you of anything," he said once we sat down. "I just need to understand where the money went before we can move forward." Lauren put this together because she knows how hard it is for me to ask these questions directly. I looked at the timeline. The dates were accurate. The amounts were not ones I recognized. "I can show you my own records," I said. "I can sit with you and go through every transaction for the last 6 months, but I need you to hear that I did not make these withdrawals." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper. "Lauren said you would say that. She said people in your position often don't remember small transfers because they don't feel like they matter in the moment." I sat with that sentence for a moment. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since the kitchen table. When did you start believing her version of my life more than the one I have lived with you for 4 years? Daniel looked out at the water. She's been the steady one through all of this. She shows up. She listens. She doesn't make me feel like I'm overreacting when I say something feels off. I nodded once. There was nothing else to say in that moment that would change the papers already in motion. When I got home that evening, the house felt colder than the weather outside. I called Michael again and told him I was ready for Thomas to draft a response that kept the process private, but did not accept the premise that I had done anything wrong. Michael said he would arrange it. Before we hung up, I added one more thing. I don't want this to become a war that follows any of us for years, I said. I want the record clear. After that, I want to be left alone to decide what comes next. My older brother was quiet for a beat. Understood, he said. We'll keep it contained. I ended the call and set the phone on the desk. The rain had started again, soft against the glass. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the sound of water meeting water, and tried to remember what the house had felt like on an ordinary Tuesday before any of the papers existed. The days after the coffee shop meeting settled into a rhythm I had not chosen. I went to work, answered emails, and sat through meetings where people were careful not to ask why I looked tired. Sophia checked in once with a quiet message that simply said she was around if the paperwork ever needed another pair of eyes. I thanked her and left it at that. My older brother, Michael, sent Thomas Reed's revised response to the separation papers, a measured document that requested full transaction records from both sides and declined to accept any premise of wrongdoing. I signed it and returned it without comment. The gossip moved the way small stories do in a place where everyone knows someone who knows you. A woman I had once had lunch with texted to ask if I was doing okay after everything with Daniel and Lauren. Another mutual acquaintance stopped replying to my messages altogether. I did not chase any of them. Each silence felt like another small confirmation that my best friend's version of events was already traveling farther than I could correct with calm explanations. Lauren continued to appear in Daniel's orbit. She posted a photo of the two of them at a work-related dinner with a caption about supporting friends through hard seasons. Daniel did not comment on it. When I saw the post, I felt the last thread of hope that he might still choose to verify the numbers himself slip away. The version Lauren had built required no proof beyond her steady presence and her willingness to name the problem first. 3 days after I returned the signed response, Sophia asked if I had time for a short walk during lunch. We met at the edge of the small park near the office. She kept her hands in her coat pockets and her voice low. I wasn't sure whether to say anything she began. I don't like getting in the middle of other people's lives, but I heard something last week that I can't stop thinking about. She paused, then continued. Lauren was at the client dinner the firm hosted. She was talking to one of Daniel's colleagues in the hallway. I wasn't trying to listen, but she was standing close to where I was getting coffee. She said she had to make the account issue sound more serious than it was because you were becoming too independent and Daniel needed someone to help him see it clearly before you pulled away completely. Sophia looked at me directly. She laughed a little when she said it, like it was a necessary adjustment to the story. I stood very still. The wind off the water moved the bare branches above us. Did you record any of that? I asked. Sophia nodded once. I had my phone in my hand already because I was taking notes on the meeting. I turned the voice memo on without thinking. I didn't plan to use it. I just didn't want to forget exactly what she said if I ever needed to remember why I felt uneasy. She hesitated. I sent it to you from a temporary address the same night. I wasn't ready to put my name on it yet. The recording arrived in my inbox that evening. It was short, less than 90 seconds, but the tone was unmistakable. Lauren's voice slightly lowered, but still carrying the warm, reasonable cadence she used when she was being helpful. She described the bank transfers as only the beginning and said she had nudged Daniel toward the lawyer because Emily has always been good at making things look smaller than they are when she wants to keep control. The colleague on the other end made a sympathetic noise. Lauren answered with a soft laugh. Sometimes you have to protect people from their own blind spots. He'll thank me later. I listened to it twice. Then I called Thomas Reed and asked him to meet me the following morning. I also called Michael and told him what the recording contained. He was quiet for several seconds. "Do you want us to use it?" he asked finally. "I want Daniel to hear it," I said. "After that, I will decide what comes next." The meeting happened 2 days later in the same coffee shop where Daniel and I had reviewed the timeline. Lauren came with him. She sat with her usual composed posture, a folder already open on the table as if she expected to take notes. Daniel looked tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. I placed my phone on the table and played the recording without introduction. Lauren's voice filled the small space between us. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than the rain outside. Daniel stared at the phone. "That's not how she described it to me," he said at last. Lauren's expression did not change. She closed the folder slowly. "Context matters," she said. I was trying to explain why I was worried. People hear what they want to hear when they're already anxious. I looked at her directly. "You didn't explain. You adjusted the story until it fit the version that kept you in the center of it, and then you made sure everyone else heard that version before I could answer it." She met my eyes without flinching. "I did what I thought was right for someone I care about. You were already pulling away. The money was only the clearest sign." Daniel turned to her. "You told me the transfers were documented. You said you had seen them yourself." "I saw patterns," Lauren answered. "I connected them to conversations I had heard. I didn't fabricate numbers. I interpreted them." The distinction hung in the air between us. Daniel looked back at me. For the first time since the kitchen table, he seemed uncertain rather than defended. "I need time to think about what I just heard," he said. I nodded. "Take it. But I will not sit through another conversation where my best friend explains my life to the man I trusted with it." I left the recording on the table and walked out into the mist. I did not look back. That evening, I called Michael and Thomas together on a conference line. I told them I had played the recording for Daniel and Lauren. I told them I had no interest in broadcasting it further or in pursuing the kind of professional and financial pressure that would follow if we continued. I asked them to stop any additional steps they had begun. Michael's voice was careful. "You're sure this recording changes the picture completely? We could make sure neither of them walks away from this without consequences." "I'm sure," I said. "I want the record between Daniel and me to be clear. I do not want to become the person who needs to destroy someone else's life to feel whole again. That is not the boundary I am willing to live inside." Thomas spoke next. "We can draft a final statement that confirms you requested and received full documentation that no discrepancies were found on your side and that the temporary measures are being lifted at your request. It can be kept private." "Do that," I said. "And then I need space from all of it. From the process and from the people who were willing to manage my story without asking me first." My older brother was quiet again. When he answered, his tone had shifted into something closer to acceptance. "All right, we'll close the file on our end. If you need anything else, you know where to find us. But we'll wait for you to reach out." I thanked them both and ended the call. The weeks that followed moved with deliberate slowness. I packed the things that were clearly mine and left the rest. Daniel did not contest the division. The house sold quietly 6 weeks later. I found a smaller place in a different part of the state, farther from the lake and from anyone who had known the three of us together. I gave notice at the firm and accepted a role with another consulting group that needed someone who could manage timelines across multiple sites. Sophia helped me pack the last boxes on a Sunday afternoon. She did not ask what I planned to do with the recording. She simply said she hoped the new job gave me quieter days. Lauren sent one final message 2 months after the coffee shop meeting. It was short. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really did think I was helping. I read it once, then blocked the number. I did not need her version of care anymore. Daniel never reached out again. I heard through one remaining mutual contact that he and Lauren were no longer spending time together in the same way, but that neither of them had lost their standing in the circles they moved through. The story had settled into the version that required the least disruption for everyone except me. I let it settle. Fighting to correct every retelling would have kept me tethered to people who had already decided my account was optional. On the first warm day after I moved, I walked along a different stretch of water. The wind was sharper here, the shoreline less familiar. I thought about the kitchen table and the folder and the recording that had finally made the adjustments visible. I thought about the choice I had made to stop the machinery my brothers could have turned on without hesitation. It had cost me the version of safety I had once believed was permanent. It had also given me back the ability to decide whose concern I would accept and whose story I would let stand without my participation. Some betrayals do not end with dramatic collapse or public reckoning. They end with a quiet refusal to keep explaining yourself to people who have already chosen the version that protects them. I had cleared my name enough to leave without carrying false weight. I had not won anything that could be measured in ruined reputations or frozen accounts. What I had kept was the boundary I could live behind without looking over my shoulder every time someone offered help that felt too much like management. That boundary is what peace has looked like since. It is smaller than I once imagined it would be. It is also the only one that has ever let me sleep through the night without rehearsing conversations that no longer need to happen. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If you were standing where I stood with the recording in your hand and the choice between full accounting and a quieter exit, would you have chosen yourself the same way?